My name is Evelyn Harper, and if you're hearing this, it means the light has started to flicker again. If you ever see it, 3 flashes, evenly spaced, don't look at the sea. I can't stress that enough. Look anywhere else. Close your eyes. Run. Because if you look, it looks back. That's how my father disappeared 15 years ago. This recording isn't a cry for help. It's a warning, a confession maybe. I don't really know what to call it. The people in town say I inherited my father's madness when I took this job, the same post he held at Merrill Point Lighthouse, 3 miles off the Maine coast. But madness doesn't leave footprints in the sand. Madness doesn't whisper your name through static. They never found his body, not a trace. Just his logbook, waterlogged and warped, sealed in a glass jar hidden under the floorboards of the keeper's quarters. The last entry read, "The sea remembers what it's owed." It was dated the night the light went out, the night the storm hit. I was 12 then. I remember watching from the mainland, the waves devouring the black shape of the lighthouse, each flash swallowed faster by rain, until there was nothing left but darkness. My father's voice had always been steady, measured, the kind of voice that could calm a whole harbor. But that night, even the ocean sounded afraid. I told myself I'd never come back here. But fate has a way of repeating itself, doesn't it? When the Coast Guard offered a temporary keeper's position this fall, his post, I said yes. I told myself I wanted closure, that I wanted to face the ghosts that raised me. But the truth is, I think I wanted to know why he stayed, even when the radio went silent, even when he must have known something was terribly wrong. Tonight is my first shift. The fog has rolled in, thick as wool, the air soaked with salt and rut. The old generator hums like a beast coming back to life. I can hear the sea slapping the rocks below, slow, deliberate, like breathing. There's comfort in routine. Climb the spiral stairs, check the lens, keep the light alive. That's all. Simple. But as I finish this first entry, something feels off. The foghorn just sounded. Once, then again, and again. 3 times. It hasn't done that since the night my father vanished. The sound lingers in the mist, low and trembling. Evelyn steadies her breath, and the first night begins. When I first arrived at the lighthouse, I told myself I'd treat it like any other job. Clock in, follow the schedule, keep the light steady, and make sure ships don't die on the rocks. That was the plan. But you can't really clock out here. Not when the nearest town is 2 hours away, and the only thing that talks back is the wind. The lighthouse stands on the northern edge of a cliff, where Maine's coastline splits into a dozen knife-edged inlets. The ocean doesn't roll here, it claws. The sound of the surf isn't soothing, it's hungry. Every night, I hear it grinding the rocks, patient as breath. My day starts before dawn. Check the fuel levels, clean the lens, run a test signal through the foghorn. Note everything in the log. The logbook, brown leather, sea-stained, still smells faintly of oil and salt. My father's handwriting fills most of it. His penmanship was neat but forceful, like he was fighting the page. Every so often I run my fingers over his entries. The earlier ones talk about weather systems, maintenance routines, visitor schedules. But the later ones, they grow strange. Sentences trail off mid-thought. Coordinates appear with no explanation. And then, nothing. Just a blank page. Until last night when I found one more. The page was damp, the ink smeared, but it was fresh. And the handwriting, identical to his, read, "If she ever comes back, tell her not to answer the call." I've read those words so many times, they've started to sound like a prayer. I try to keep myself busy to ignore how the silence gets inside you. Sometimes I talk to him, out loud like he's still listening. I'll mutter about the fog density or curse when the generator stalls. I know it's pointless, but it's better than hearing the emptiness breathe. There's a radio in the control room, an old Marine band transceiver wired to the Coast Guard network. It's supposed to stay quiet unless there's a passing vessel or weather warning. But the other night, it crackled to life. Static, long and dry, then, just under it, my name. Evelyn. Soft. Drawn out. I froze. The sound wasn't human. It wasn't machine either. It was somewhere in between, like a recording that remembered how to whisper. I adjusted the dial, but the frequency was dead. I tried the Coast Guard channel. Nothing. Then I flipped to the local emergency band and heard it again. Evelyn Harper. Then silence. For a while I convinced myself it was interference, maybe fishermen or storm distortion, but there hasn't been a fishing vessel near this stretch in months. When I went back to the logbook that night, I noticed something new. Another faint line had appeared beneath my father's final entry. The same shaky handwriting, the same damp ink. She's not alone. The storm rolled in soon after. The wind hit the tower like fists. Every few minutes the foghorn bellowed through the gale, a low, mournful groan that made the glass tremble. I sat by the window and watched the beams sweep across the sea, slicing through sheets of rain. And for a second, just one, I thought I saw something answer it. A flicker. Far out, like another light blinking back. I should have ignored it, but I didn't. I put on my coat, grabbed the lantern, and headed for the stairs. Outside, the storm swallowed me whole. That was the night I decided to find the source of the voice calling my name.
The first storm rolled in just before midnight. At first I thought it was routine, the kind of wild, endless tempest that Maine's coast is famous for. The lighthouse shuddered under the pressure, its iron bones moaning as the wind screamed through every crack. I'd checked the barometer earlier that evening. It hadn't so much as twitched. No warning, no gradual drop, just darkness, and then thunder like the sky itself had split in half. By 1 in the morning, I'd lost the mainland radio signal. Static filled the room like white fire, hissing and snapping in rhythm with the lightning. I told myself it was just the storm interfering with the transmission. Still, it sounded wrong. The noise wasn't random. It was pulsing, repeating, almost breathing. I was halfway up the spiral stairs when I heard it. Evelyn. My hand froze on the railing. The voice wasn't from inside the tower. It came from outside, low and distant, carried on the wind, or maybe rising from the rocks below. My father used to call my name like that when I was little, stretching it into the storm, laughing when the sea threw it back. But my father had been dead 15 years. I climbed the last few steps, heart pounding in my throat, and pressed my hand against the glass of the lantern room. The storm should have been chaotic. Waves crashing, lightning splitting the sky, rain blurring the horizon. But what I saw below stopped my breath. The ocean was still. Flat, glossy, perfectly unmoving like a sheet of obsidian. And yet the wind still screamed, the thunder still rolled, but the water, the sea itself, had gone dead quiet. "Evelyn." This time the voice was closer. I squinted through the beam of the rotating light, and that's when I noticed the rhythm of the lamp. It flickered once, twice, 3 times. Then the light froze for half a second longer than it should have, spilling across the water. And in that flash, that sliver of impossible light, I saw him. A figure stood waist-deep in the black sea. He was wearing my father's old coat, the one they buried him in. Lightning struck again, and for that moment the world went white. His face, God, his face looked like it had been washed out of him, bleached by the salt and time. But I knew those eyes, that stance, the way he leaned slightly on one side like his hip ached. "Come down," the voice said, not shouted, spoke, calm, familiar. "Time to finish what I started." The foghorn blared behind me, deep and hollow, almost human in its tone. Then the radio crackled to life again, even though I'd switched it off earlier. A voice cut through the static. "The tide takes what it's owed." I froze. That was the same phrase my father used to write in the margins of his logbooks. His favorite saying, one I'd never understood. I'd always thought it was metaphorical, something poetic maybe. But now, hearing it whispered by a dead voice through a dead radio, I realized he hadn't meant it as poetry. I stumbled back down the stairs, nearly slipping on the damp steps. My flashlight beam jittered across the walls, catching fragments of mold and paint that looked like faces if I stared too long. The old wooden door at the base rattled in its hinges, something pounding against it, not with fists, but with weight, like the sea itself was trying to get in. I grabbed the latch just as the light flickered again, 3 sharp pulses through the window, and the knocking stopped. Complete silence. When I opened the door, there was nothing there. Just the smell of salt and iron and a thin trail of seawater stretching across the threshold. I locked it. I don't even remember making the decision. It was instinct. I slammed the bolt home and backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. The radio crackled again. The volume turned itself up, slowly, deliberately, until the static became deafening. And underneath, layered deep, I heard the old recording logs, my father's voice echoing from the archive reels. Harper log, day 49, wind direction, east-northeast, visibility, low, light maintenance completed. Normal, routine, then silence. And then his tone changed. "If anyone finds this, the light isn't what it seems. Don't let it go dark. If it flickers..." Static drowned him out. I turned the dial back and replayed it, pressing the old cassette against my ear. But the second time, his voice overlapped with something else, a second voice that matched perfectly. My voice. "If it flickers, Don't look at the sea. My knees buckled. The recording wasn't old. The tape wasn't warped. The message, that voice, had been recorded recently. But how could that be? The storm outside roared again, lightning searing the sky, and when the light swept across the ocean once more, I caught a glimpse of something moving out there. Dozens of pale shapes just beneath the surface, circling slowly. I turned off the radio, but it kept whispering, faint and wet. The tide takes what it's owed. The voice of the sea, my father's voice, my own. And in that moment, I knew the storm wasn't leaving. It never would. It wasn't weather at all. It was remembrance. The ocean had come to collect. I sat alone beside the lamp until dawn, every flicker of the light making my pulse stutter. When morning came, I tried to tell myself it had been a dream, just exhaustion. But later, when I checked the old log recorder again, the entry had changed. It now ended with a single handwritten line I didn't write. The tide takes what it's owed. When I first found my father's old reel recorder, it was tucked beneath a stack of moldy logbooks, hidden as if even the sea itself had tried to swallow it. The metal casing was corroded, the label smudged, but one thing was still legible. Log entry 67. I'd seen dozens of other entries in his handwriting, each one methodical, meticulous, but this number didn't exist in any of the books. It was like the Lighthouse itself had erased it. I waited until nightfall to play it. Something about it demanded darkness. The foghorn moaned in the distance, the same rhythm it had grown since the storm began 3 days ago. The walls shuddered, the windows wept, and still the storm didn't move. I sat cross-legged beside the recorder, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of kerosene and salt. When I pressed play, the first sound that came through wasn't my father's voice. It was the sea. Not the normal wash of waves. It was deeper, almost deliberate, like something breathing beneath the water. Then came the static. A crackle, a pop, and a single line whispered through the noise. If the light flickers 3 times, don't look, don't ever look. I froze. It was my father's voice, faint, warped by time, but unmistakably his. That same steady tone that had once narrated bedtime stories about constellations and storms. Except now, it carried something else. A tremor, a warning. He spoke of patterns, names, dates, coordinates. Each keeper before me saw it, each one gone when the beam broke in 3s. His breath hitched. He said, "The light isn't malfunctioning, it's choosing." I didn't realize I was holding my breath until my vision blurred. The storm roared louder outside, rattling the glass in its frame as if echoing his words. The light flickered twice above me, casting long shadows that trembled along the walls. I stared at the ceiling, waiting, terrified, to see if there'd be a third. The recording crackled again. My father coughed, muttered something intelligible, then spoke softer, as if leaning close to the microphone. "Never look directly at the light, Evelyn." My stomach turned to ice. He had said my name. Not, "If my daughter ever hears this," not, "To whoever follows." He spoke to me, like he knew I would find it. Then silence. But the reel didn't stop spinning. The tape whirred, then hissed, like something new was forcing its way through. I almost turned it off until I heard the next voice.
It wasn't his. It was mine. At first, I thought it was an echo, some strange distortion, but then it said something I hadn't said. You shouldn't have played it. My throat tightened. I whispered, "What the hell?" And before the words left my mouth, the same voice on the tape repeated them perfectly, a heartbeat too late, like it knew what I was going to say. The storm howled through the cracks in the window pane, but all I could hear was that echo of myself. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered. "Why are you doing this?" the tape repeated, my voice warping at the edges. I stopped breathing. Then the reel slowed. I could hear faint scratching, like nails on metal, and under it something wet moving. The voice, my voice, came again. "Look behind you." The air turned cold. The lamp beside me flickered once, twice, and in the pause before the third, I turned the recorder off. Silence filled the room, heavy, alive, crawling. I tried to convince myself it was an auditory illusion, that my mind had folded the words in on themselves, the way grief sometimes loops memories until they don't make sense anymore. But then I heard it, soft, rhythmic footsteps on the metal stairs leading up to the lantern room. Slow, wet, human. I grabbed the flashlight and moved toward the staircase. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. Each step groaned beneath me, the old wood sweating from the damp air. And when I reached the landing, I saw them, footprints, bare, water pooling in their wake. They led upward, toward the light. And even though every part of me screamed to stop, to lock the door and pretend none of this was happening, I couldn't. Because I knew those weren't my footprints. They were his, my father's, and they were fresh.
The spiral staircase groaned beneath my weight, each step slick with condensation. My flashlight barely cut through the fog that had begun to creep up from the lower floors, hugging the walls like some living thing. The storm outside had become a constant roar, a drumbeat against the stone lighthouse, against the rusting iron railing, against my sanity. Every vibration, every tremor of the tower felt deliberate, like it was breathing in time with me, or worse, in time with something inside me. I paused halfway up, pressing my palm to the railing. It hummed under my fingers, a low mechanical vibration, steady and rhythmic. The kind of hum that's not natural, not from wind or engine, but from something older, something patient. It was the lighthouse itself. And it was alive. My heart thumped, echoing in my ears as I continued upward. The metal steps shined wetly in the dim flashlight glow, and each step made the shadows leap along the walls like restless spirits. The closer I got to the top, the heavier the air became, a mixture of salt, rust, and something fouler that clung to my throat. At last I reached the lantern room. The door was slightly ajar, swaying gently, creaking in protest. I pushed it open, and the sight inside stole my breath. The lens of the rotating light glowed faintly red, bathing the room in an eerie, bruised illumination. It wasn't just lit, it pulsed, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat. And standing behind it was a figure. I froze. The figure didn't move at first, but then it turned slowly, and I saw the face. It was mine. Or, rather, a version of me I didn't recognize. Pale as sea foam, eyes wide and hollow, and strands of hair plastered to a face streaked with seawater. Her clothes clung as if wet from some unseen depth, dripping onto the floor in thin rivulets. Her skin shimmered faintly under the red light, like it had absorbed the storm itself. "She," I whispered, voice trembling. "She's me." But she smiled, and that smile was not comforting. It was patient, expectant, like she'd been waiting for this moment, for me to climb these stairs and step into her presence. "You came?" she said, her voice exactly like mine, but colder, sharper, edged with something I couldn't name. "I've been waiting for you." I stumbled back instinctively, tripping over the railing, my flashlight clattering to the floor and spinning weak beams of light across the walls. The red glow from the lantern reflected in my eyes, making them ache, and when I looked back, she was closer, moving with the silent grace of something that shouldn't exist. The lens turned slowly, a grinding mechanical rotation that sent waves of red across the room. And then I saw it, what the light was showing. The sea. But not the sea I knew. It shimmered black and red, an endless, roiling mass that stretched beyond the horizon. Shadows rose from the water, twisted shapes that twisted and writhed in time with the light. Each flicker revealed a memory, a past, a death. Keepers lost, vanishings, names written in the foam. The tide itself seemed to pulse in rhythm with the rotating lantern, claiming what it was owed. "She shows you now," the figure said, tilting her head. "She shows you what we are." I didn't understand at first. Then it clicked. This wasn't just a ghost. This was me, or what I would become. The lighthouse didn't just choose keepers. It transformed them. It fed, shaped, and remade them. And every step I'd taken up these stairs had been preordained. Every heartbeat pulled toward this inevitability. I wanted to turn and run, but my legs refused. The air grew thicker, red light bleeding into my lungs. I could taste salt and iron and hear whispers in the hum of the lamp, hundreds of whispers, every voice mine, overlapping, echoing across the decades. She smiled like she'd been waiting for me. And then the realization struck like lightning. The light wasn't just illuminating the sea, it was reflecting me. Projecting the inevitable, revealing the role I would play in the endless cycle. The red pulsed faster now, synced with the flickering that had always haunted the tower. My own shadow stretched and warped across the walls, doubling, tripling, fracturing into something unrecognizable. The smell of seawater became fetid, cloying. I gagged, backing against the wall, but there was nowhere to go. "Join me," the figure whispered, reaching toward me with hands that trembled like living water. "Or let it take you anyway." And then, the light flickered 3 times. Everything went white. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. My knees buckled. My mind burned with the weight of everything I'd seen, everything I was about to become. And just as the pulse of the lantern room filled me with unbearable clarity, the world gave way. The next moment I was falling, the red glow turning to black, the hum of the lighthouse stretching into infinity, and I knew I was already part of it. The sea was waiting, and so was I.
When I came to, the world was wet. Cold water licked my skin through my clothes, seeping in from the floor. The scent of brine was thicker here, mingled with mold and something metallic. Old iron, old blood. I was no longer in the lantern room. No, the lighthouse had shifted. Or perhaps I had been pulled down into a chamber beneath its foundations, where shadows pooled like oil and the stone walls wept with moisture.
I tried to move, but my legs trembled, weak and trembling. The flashlight from earlier lay beside me, flickering in fitful bursts. And then I noticed it. The wall in front of me was glass. Thick, cold, impossibly smooth. Outside it, the sea pressed against the barrier like a living thing, its surface dark and roiling, illuminated by faint undulating lights beneath. Figures moved there. Past keepers, I realized. Faces I'd never seen, yet they felt familiar, like echoes in memory I hadn't lived. They drifted just beyond the glass, frozen in purpose, their eyes empty yet aware, watching, waiting. And then I saw her. My double. Pale, dripping seawater, hair plastered to her face. She smiled again, the same patient, knowing smile from the lantern room. But here, through this watery veil, it seemed older, wiser, crueler. "You've come," she whispered, voice vibrating through the glass and directly into my skull. "It was always going to be you." I swallowed hard. What is this place?" "The chamber beneath the light," she said. Her lips moved and the sound traveled as if through water. "The lighthouse doesn't warn sailors. It never has. It doesn't guide ships to safety. It keeps something else in." I backed up instinctively, feeling the damp stone walls press against me. "Something else?" Her eyes glinted, reflecting the strange underwater light beyond the glass. "A hunger older than any storm, older than this tower, older than your family line. Every keeper thinks she is chosen to protect lives, to tend the flame. But the flame, it feeds, and we are the feed. The keepers, we are the ones kept." I pressed my palm against the glass, and she mirrored me exactly. My reflection wasn't mine. It was her, older, knowing, drenched, and terrifying. The pressure of the sea beyond felt like a heartbeat in my chest. Tiny currents of water pulsed against the glass, shaping shadows of writhing things that I could not name. "They said we were the light keepers," she continued. Her lips moved and the sound traveled as if through water. "But every daughter must replace the father. Every keeper must feed the light, or it breaks its bonds. If the light fails, it escapes." I smiled hard. "What do you mean, escape?" "You've felt it in the fog, heard it in the radio static. The tide remembers what it's owed. The lighthouse keeps it in." I sank to my knees, shivering. "Why me? I'm not ready." "You will be," she said softly. Her hand pressed against the glass in sync with mine, though I felt no physical warmth, only the pull of inevitability. "Your father knew the day would come. He tried to leave clues, warnings, logs filled with half-truths. You've read them, yes?" I nodded, trembling. "The tape, the log, everything." "Everything led you here," she said, voice barely more than a ripple. "The storm will come again. And this time, you're the one who must take his place. You must feed the light, or it will feast on the world outside." I looked past her into the watery void beyond the glass. Shapes shifted there, long serpentine forms, massive and inhuman, coiling beneath the waves. I could see dozens of smaller shadows, writhing and darting, all pressing against the barrier. The lighthouse wasn't a beacon, it was a cage, and I had stepped inside. "Do you understand?" she asked, tilting her head, water dripping from her hair like thick ink. The light chooses its keeper, and the sea chooses what it will take. You are both. I could barely breathe. My chest tightened with the pressure of revelation, and the storm outside seemed to echo the chamber's heartbeat, rhythmic, unstoppable. The glass trembled beneath my hands, as if the ocean itself was answering her words, nodding in agreement. I don't want this, I whispered, tears blurring my vision. You don't have a choice, she said firmly. The cycle is unbroken. Your father kept it for years. He fed it, and now it is your turn. Look at the light, Evelyn. See what it holds, and accept what you must become. I forced my eyes to the lantern lens above me, recalling the red glow that had pulsed in the tower. It had been beautiful and terrible, a lighthouse twisted into something alien, something conscious. The light had called me, pulled me, and now I understood. The flickering was never a warning for sailors. It was a signal, a summons. The whispers in my head rose to a crescendo, overlapping with the sound of the storm above. The shadows beyond the glass pressed closer, straining against the barrier as if testing its strength. I felt a cold certainty crawl along my spine. If I refused, the tide would have its way, and the world outside, the lives I had hoped to protect, would be lost. My double pressed her hand to the glass one final time. The storm comes again. Will you step into the light, Evelyn? Will you take your father's place? I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Somewhere deep beneath the roar of the waves and the hum of the chamber, I heard the pulse of inevitability. And then I knew that the lighthouse had accepted me. I was the keeper now, and the sea waited patiently.
The wind tore at my clothes as I ascended the spiral staircase, each step groaning beneath me like the tower itself protested my passage. The storm had intensified, thrashing against the lighthouse with the fury of decades bottled in the sea. Lightning cracked above, illuminating the spiral staircase in jagged bursts, and I felt the weight of inevitability pressing against my chest. By the time I reached the lantern room, the light was flickering violently, 3 brief flashes that cast the room in intermittent crimson. My double's voice echoed behind me, carried on the roar of the wind. "Turn it toward the sea, Evelyn. Do it. Now." I froze, my hands hovering over the controls. The lens rotated lazily, trembling with each gust. The red glow pulsed like a heartbeat, sinking with the storm, sinking with something beneath the glass that I had glimpsed only moments ago. The radio crackled violently, a familiar yet panicked voice cutting through the static. "Lighthouse Harper! This is the Coast Guard. Why is your light out? Respond!" I swallowed hard. My father's warnings, the logbooks, the endless nights listening to the tide whisper its hunger, it all led here. If I reignited the light fully, I would awaken the creature below, the one that had waited for centuries, imprisoned by the very tower I now commanded. But if I didn't, it would reach through the glass, through the stone, and find me here. My reflection shimmered in the glass, pale and wet, water still dripping from her hair. "You know what must be done," she said softly, eyes locking on mine. "Feed it, or it feeds on you." I stepped forward, heart hammering, hands trembling. Every fiber of my being screamed for denial, for retreat, but the storm seemed to pulse with my fear, amplifying it, pressing me toward the edge. The light faltered again, 3 more flashes, and in that rhythm I saw the faces it had taken before,
past keepers, daughters, sons, their expressions frozen in eternal dread, mouths open as though screaming beneath the waves. I saw my father, younger, terrified, turning the lens toward the sea one last time. "It's not a beacon," I whispered, voice breaking. "It's a mouth." The radio screamed again, static cutting out most of the words, but the urgency was clear. The light must be on. I reached out, gripping the controls. The storm's howl and the sea's pressure seemed to merge into a single living force, demanding obedience. My reflection leaned forward, pale fingers brushing the glass from the other side. "Now, Evelyn, don't hesitate." And then I made my choice. I twisted the lens, redirecting the red beam fully toward the dark, roiling sea. The storm seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Then, from beneath the lighthouse, the water erupted in white light, a column of luminescence that split the waves like a blade. Shapes writhed within it, enormous, impossible forms, coiling and twisting, trying to resist the binding of the beam. I saw shadows, faces, mouths opening and closing, eyes wide with hunger. The tower shuddered beneath me. The glass walls vibrated as if the sea itself were leaning against them, testing the strength of my defiance. My double's eyes softened, almost tenderly. "It's contained. For now." I stumbled backward, heart pounding, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the glowing column. The red light flickered once more, then steadied, solid and unwavering, cutting a path through the storm. Silence followed, heavy, absolute, the kind that presses against your ears and shakes the soul. The storm remained, wind howling and rain lashing, but the white column in the sea faded gradually into darkness, leaving only the occasional reflection of lightning in its depths. The lens rotated lazily again, now steady, now obedient. I sank to my knees, shaking, wet, exhausted. My hands rested on the cold metal of the controls, and for the first time I understood fully what my father had meant. The lighthouse was not a warning, not a guide. It was a prison, a mouth, a devourer restrained only by the diligence of its keeper. And now I was its keeper. My reflection in the glass faded into shadow, leaving only me and the faint, residual red glow of the lens. I had surrendered to the cycle, fed the light, and yet I felt no relief, only the quiet knowledge that the tide remembered what it was owed, and that I had, at least, for now, paid its debt. The storm roared on, but the lighthouse stood firm. The beam vanished into the gray chaos, steady and lethal, and the sea, patient and hungry, waited.
The Coast Guard arrived on a gray morning, the sea still churning with the remnants of the storm. I watched from a distance, hidden among the rocks, as their small boats cut through the waves toward the lighthouse. They had no idea what they were walking into, no idea that the structure they called abandoned held centuries of secrets and a price no one alive had ever truly paid. Inside, the lighthouse smelled of salt, damp wood, and the faint metallic tang of machinery left running too long. The keepers, temporary men sent to survey, repair, or inspect, moved cautiously, boots echoing on the spiral staircase. They reached the lantern room, peering up at the lens with a mixture of awe and unease. One of them, a young man with nervous eyes, called out, "There's a logbook here. Last entry is recent. Who keeps a log in a lighthouse no one's manned for years?" They leafed through the pages, flipping past decades of careful handwriting, the meticulous notes of maintenance, storm reports, and strange annotations about lights flickering in patterns no one outside the lighthouse would understand. And then they found it, the final entry. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, neat, and achingly familiar. My handwriting. The date was stamped years into the future, far beyond the day they'd arrived. The words were simple, almost clinical. I am the keeper now. The light burns and the tide waits. If you hear this, you are already too late. The men stared, pale, shifting uneasily as the storm outside rumbled again, distant at first, then closer, until the tower itself seemed to shiver under the wind's pressure. The lens began to flicker, 3 faint pulses like a heartbeat. One of the crew reached for the radio, static crackling to life before words could form. Then came the voice, faint but unmistakable. This is the keeper speaking. If you hear this, you're already too late. No one spoke. The words repeated once, wavering with the interference, then faded into static. The men glanced at each other, unease thick in their silence. One stepped toward the doorway, muttering, maybe we should leave. And yet the light kept flickering. 3 pulses, 3 warnings, and the tower, though outwardly empty, seemed alive, breathing, watching. The logbook lay open on the desk, pages rustling as if a wind had risen inside the room itself, revealing only shadows beneath the glass of the lens. They left quickly, boots slipping on wet stone, voices raised above the wind. But behind them, the lighthouse remained. The lens flickered again, 3 distinct flashes, faint but deliberate. Somewhere within, I watched, unseen, the red glow illuminating the waves like teeth in the dark. The radio crackled once more, faintly, almost teasingly, a final thread of my voice threading through the static. This is the keeper speaking. If you hear this, you're already too late. And then silence, save for the whisper of the sea, patient and eternal, as the lighthouse waited for the next daughter, the next keeper, the next tide owed.
They told me no one had worked here since the last storm. I laughed at the warning, thinking it was a joke left behind by some old keeper with too much time and too many ghosts. Today was my first day alone in the lighthouse, and everything seemed normal. I walked the spiral stairs, polishing the brass fittings and checking the lantern, humming softly to myself. The sea was calm, the fog thick but forgiving. I set up my logbook, pen poised, ready to mark the day's routine. I wanted this to be the start of something peaceful, a job like any other, until it began. 3 flickers of light cut through the fog outside, faint at first, then unmistakable. My pen froze. I remembered the stories, the warnings I had read. If you see the light flicker 3 times, don't look at the sea. The radio crackled, a whisper of static carrying a voice that seemed too familiar. I didn't recognize it at first. Then I did, and it chilled me to my core. The keeper speaks. If you hear this, you're already too late. I dropped the pen. Outside, the fog thickened, the lantern lands spinning as if alive. I wanted to run, but the staircase groaned beneath my feet, and I realized the cycle had begun again. The lighthouse waited, patient and eternal, for the next daughter, the next keeper, the next tide owed. And then, hard cut to black. Faintly, the foghorn moaned across the empty sea, carrying a warning no one alive could ignore.